Let's start. Up 17. There we go. So this is part 2 of the NEC4 Alliance contract that we put together particularly for APUG. APUG is Asia Pacific Users Group, and most of the people on here probably are members of that. And last week we did, oh, well, no, when was it last week? 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, something like that. And if you recall,
like that,
I think I was there for 5 or 10 minutes, and then somehow my internet collapsed and Tim picked up the pieces and did a very good job on their own. So as we did last time, by all means, ask any questions as we go through. We both have the meeting chat up. We'll see how it goes, answer as we go through, and or wait until the end. So yeah, please do ask some questions. So NEC4 Alliance Contract Part 2. So that's me, and that's enough of me. Next one.
And that's me.
And that's Tim. And
that's enough of me.
Looking good. That's enough of you.
I'll leave on there for a few more seconds.
Yeah, everybody's seen that. We're all fine with that one. Just go back to the other one. No, anyways. So what we're going to do today is a very quick recap on what we did last time, or mainly what Tim did last time. And then we're going to look at the application of the contracts. If you recall, those that attended the webinar last time, that we focused on sort of pre-contract issues, thinking about using the alliance contracts, where you might use it, where you might not use it, how to put it together. So now we're assumed we're in contract. There's an award, and now we're going to apply it. So a quick recap is that we have at we have our alliance contract, which is made up of any number of participants, really. On the screen there, you always have a client, of course. We're pretty well sure you'll always have at least contractor A and at least one other organisation. If you just have the two, I don't really see the point of having an alliance contract. So this is assuming here we've got two large, I suppose, or main contractors, contractor A, contractor B. A key supplier. There could be several of those, perhaps, and perhaps two key consultants. In turn, consultant A might award a subcontract or two, and contractor A and B might award a subcontract or two, but they are outside of our group, which is our key members of the alliance. The client, the arm off a client says a subcontractor. I'm not sure we'd appoint a subcontractor, but never mind. Why not? Okay, so the focus is really the inner circle. So in our alliance structure, we have, I suppose that the main focus, of course, is the client. Without a client, there would be no construction industry, would there? So what actually does the client want? What is the client looking for here? So the client will be setting the objectives for the alliance and the initial scope, including what they want out of it, and perhaps a performance table. If you remember last week, we looked at the performance table, which I'm really liking actually in the world of NEC, and I see perhaps in future editions getting rid of things like delay damages and low performance damages and the like, and actually consolidating them all into a performance table. It works really well. The only downside of the performance table is that it's both incentives and, if you like, disincentives. And if you think about things like KPIs at the moment in clause X20 or X12, we only have positive outcomes for KPIs. We only give, if you like, rewards for meeting or exceeding the target, not deductions. So I suppose my one little worry I have, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, Tim, as the slides have disappeared, is using the performance table for negative things as well as positive things. Any thoughts on that? Is that okay? Does that meet your
I think you'll be really careful with that, haven't you? Because otherwise it's better to incentivize people rather than to penalize people, isn't it? In terms of trying to create a positive environment, collaborative environment to work in, I think I'll be really careful with doing a sort of a negative thing. But nevertheless, you can do that with a performance table. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I think you've got to just be really careful about doing that.
Take care. I mean, just think about the behavior that you may you may cause or create having such negative provisions. So sticking with the client, they are of course selecting the members of the alliance. They will carry out all sorts of assurances, cost assurance, quality assurance, as stated in the scope. They may do nothing. It's completely up to the client, isn't it, and their appetite for I suppose we call it audit, but assurance seems to be a better word than audit to me. They would like the assurance that you know the cost that the alliance is putting forward is correct in accordance with the terms of the contract. They would like the assurance that the quality of the design and or the construction delivered by the alliance is in accordance with the scope. So there is some there is that opportunity for the client to do that, and of course they need to make payments. I suppose that's their one of their key roles. So on the diagram itself, we have our alliance board, who will in turn appoint an alliance manager, and that alliance manager, may come from the client's organisation, may not. We looked at this, or Tim certainly did last time. I think,
yeah, or they could or equally be sort of an independent person, couldn't they? Really, not necessarily a member of anybody, any of the
from
board
anywhere. I mean, what I would look for here is the right competencies of that particular person, and I think wherever you come from, you should be able to act correctly in the capacity of an alliance manager. It's a tough call, probably even tougher. I would actually think that an alliance manager is possibly even tougher than a project manager under the ECC. But
definitely, and I think one of the key things here is about their sort of behaviour and attitude, isn't it? I think it's fair to say that I think we touched on this in the last session. Obviously, this contract is a far more collaborative contract than a normal ECC contract, and so the alliance manager needs to be very mindful of that and understand that and be able to facilitate that collaboration.
Yeah, and I think we said last time, this to me is the height of collaboration.
Definitely.
Are we, people quite loosely use the word alliance. I'm not convinced I've seen a true alliance in being, and I'm not absolutely sure that we're ready for alliance. And we have so many discussions still on things like disallowed cost. People have a real hang up with things like disallowed cost and lack of productivity and inefficiency. If you got hang ups on those sort of terms, then you got problems, because none of those exist in the alliance contract. It is the greatest form of collaboration.
Yeah, and I think, as hopefully we'll draw out in today's session, this contract's, should we say, far less transactional than, say, the ECC, where you're submitting and accepting things. Of course, there's a lot more compensation events under the ECC compared to this contract, and that's all part of this collaborative environment that you're working in. You're not trying to demarcate as much because you're all in it together, and of course you share the rewards through the performance table. But that's a real tricky thing, I think, to get your head around, isn't it?
I think so.
And compared to, it's difficult enough to use a normal NEC contract, let alone move to an alliance environment, I think.
Yeah, we are definitely learning. You can see this is definitely there's a lot of behavioural aspects to take into account here. How will people perform in certain circumstances? Picking your the alliance board and your partners is going to be very difficult indeed. So you've got to take due skill, care, and attention and time to set things up, I think, more properly here than with any other contract, particularly as you're stuck with them, as we'll come on to that later, a no-sue clause in the event of negligence, breach, or chaos, or rubbish performance. Tough luck, you've agreed not to sue each other. So again, as we said last time, how many organizations will willingly just sign up to a no-sue?
Well, and of course, actually bringing those partners on board, the alliance partners, is far less about their tendered cost. That's not really an issue in this, is it? It's more about how they're going to work with you. Do they have the right behaviours? And of course, that kind of assessment in terms of bringing them on board and bringing everybody together in terms of their behavioural attitudes and can they actually work collaboratively? Do they actually understand what that really means? Is far more important than any sort of commercial aspect, if you like, I would suggest.
Yeah. So the team itself, the delivery team, will deliver the work of the alliance, and as we're saying, really, they are put together on a best for project basis, and that's fairly tricky to do that. Of course, the alliance manager, we talked about that person, but they need to manage the alliance. They are, again, it's 10.1. Follow the contract, the implementation plan. The interesting thing for me, for the alliance board, it's up to them to set the strategy to decide how to allocate the work and to appoint the alliance manager, but their decisions must be unanimous, so not a 3-2 or anything like that, or it's a 5-0. Everything is unanimous. And therefore I think sometimes you may need to change the question to get that unanimous outcome. So if you put certain questions in front, you might get a 3-2. Change the question slightly, or change the notion slightly, and you might get your 5-0 or whatever, however many is in the in the alliance board.
And it's true to say about the alliance board, Rob, that they're all equal members, aren't they? Nobody has any sort of chair role necessarily. They all have an equal vote, and there's no sort of head of the board, if you like.
Which is interesting, isn't it? Maybe you want to rotate that. So on a longer alliance, maybe you get a 6-month stint or something like that. That'd be quite nice to rotate it. But and you where I thought you were going is the partner bottom right in red might be a 5% by cost or value player, yet they've got an equal vote in the board. So it's not a vote by percentage of stake in project. It's a vote by per board member has that particular vote. So interesting concept. Okay, so that wasn't such a quick recap, but anyway, it was a recap. So application of the alliance contract. So we'll do this one at a time, one slide at a time between me and Tim, and anybody else wants to chip in and say something, comment, but you are most welcome. And maybe we'll just add to what each other has to say. So our client, as we've just said, they are identifying the objectives and the targets and the incentives in the performance table. And as we just said, take great care in thinking about the behavior you may instigate by emphasizing too much on negative aspects in the performance table. They will be a member of the alliance board, but they only get one vote. It's my job. I'm the client, but you've only got one job. One
just
vote.
Going back to the first point, Rob, in setting the objectives or the targets and incentives in the performance table, is it fair to say that whilst the client could do that unilaterally, inevitably that's really going to be done more in a consultative way with the alliance board members, or not?
Well, may depend if you use your early alliance involvement clause, doesn't it? That's one of those things. Now,
yes. So maybe if you're not using that clause, is this more done unilaterally by the client?
Possibly. I think it actually depends upon your procurement law and rules. So certainly in France, let's use France. In France, under EU regulations, it's very difficult to negotiate contracts in the EU, but the rest of the world doesn't seem to have such a hang-up. Although there is a nervousness certainly in Hong Kong with negotiating. That's what I would say. There's a with negotiation comes the fear of corruption or preferential treatment or something like that. Personally, I love negotiation. It's my go-to procurement route every day of the week. I think you're absolutely right. You hit the nail on the head. How can just one person decide what's right for that top that top line is everything, really, isn't it? If you get that wrong, you're going to be struggling in the rest of the duration of the contract to do what you're supposed to do.
Perhaps one approach, which may work, in somewhere like Hong Kong, perhaps better, is whilst the client might make the initial unilateral decisions around what the objectives are and the targets and incentives, they may be, of course, you've got to be very careful with this, but they may be subject to sort of final agreement with all the partners once they're on board. So if you like, the client sets the direction of travel, if you like, but if one of those partners comes back with a very good reason, well, this objective isn't quite right, isn't it this? Or this target or incentive isn't quite right, shouldn't it be that? Maybe that's a way of approaching it.
It is, yeah. I mean, you're making tender assessment a little bit more tricky. I'm a big fan of, okay, please give me a compliant bid, but please talk to me about alternatives. I quite like compliant and alternative bids, but you can't. I don't think you can set these out too rigidly, can you? The more rigid they are, then you're going to have problems. So I think it's dependent upon the locality of the project and the procurement law that surrounds a particular project as to how much you can do in terms of negotiation versus competition. I mean, let's be honest again, most of the competition, sorry, most of the work will inevitably be done by subcontractors, and they may take up 60, 70, 80% of the value of the alliance itself, and and much of the competition will come through that process. So don't worry, not everything is negotiated. We're not negotiating literally everything here. There's a process that will lead to a substantial amount of competition once the alliance is in place and deciding partners, subcontractors, suppliers, etc.
Because I think it's true to say that a lot of the work will be suppliers and subcontractors. Won't it? That will be a good proportion of the overall cost.
Yeah, and maybe comparing UK to Hong Kong, maybe there's more of a chance of contractors' own operatives doing the work in Hong Kong than there is in UK, where the most contractors seem to have little or no blue collar workers these days and subcontract everything. So slightly different model of the world throughout, isn't it? So the client can change their requirements. You would think that, wouldn't you? This is my job, it's my money. If I decide I want this road dualing instead of single, that's my call, isn't it? I don't need to have agreements. I would like to change my requirements. So that's that's expected.
Is it worth just having a chat around client requirements? Because I think it's a little bit of a tricky one to get for some people to get their head around it, because it's a subset of the scope, isn't it? And effectively it is scope information, so it's the same type of information that would go in the scope, so it specifies or describes the works and states any constraints. But the difference between this and other scope information is that this bit can only be changed by the client, whereas the rest of the scope, as in not client requirements, but the rest of the scope can be changed by the board, can't it?
Yeah, and moving on from that, the change of client's requirements would lead to a compensation event.
Yes. So a client's got to be a little bit careful about what they put into the client requirements, haven't they? In that they don't necessarily want to put all the scope into the client requirements. And at one end of the spectrum, you could do that, but that's not necessarily going to be helpful, is it? In terms of how the alliance board and how the alliance works.
Yeah, I've always thought of these as this is a fairly high level expectation, really. So it's a road from A to B. It's my key requirements. It is the road to A to B. Okay, you've got to say whether it's single lane or dual or something like that, but it is the key client's requirements. I don't think we're talking about the quality of the blades of grass used in the landscaping or anything like that. So
No, and you're probably not talking about that many constraints either, are you?
Constraints? Well, I mean, probably a lot of the constraints will emerge. Yeah, some key ones. I mean, time could be a driver, couldn't it? Time could be a key thing. So it could be that funding is coming in from somewhere. So certain things have to be done by certain dates in order to get meet funding requirements.
Sure.
Okay, so the clients, so they check applications for payment. So that there could well be a role for an advisor to help a client here. No disrespect to the client, but they may not be very well conversant with, if you like, the construction industry. So they may not have skills to hand to do things like check applications for payment and that sort of thing. So there's always a role for advisors, no matter how what contracts we produce. There's always going to be a role for expert advisors to help the client perform their role. They will ultimately take over the completed work and put it into into beneficial use, and it's up to them whether they wish to carry out audits of quality and costs. And again, they may need to go to expert advisors to help them audit quality and or cost. I mean, you would expect, wouldn't you, that the Alliance would take care of that, but you know, that in terms of probity, you will surely always, a client organisation will wish to do some independent look over of quality and costs, even though the rest of the Alliance board is saying, oh yes, everything is exactly as per the scope. I think it's expected that there will be some independent assurance stroke audit checks of that. I don't think there's a problem with that. So, and they must pay. They must get their hands in the pocket and
yes, they are the ones who pay eventually.
You want it, you got to pay for it, but yeah. Okay.
So the Alliance board. So of course that's made up of the partners. We had a slide earlier that sort of had that sort of green circle on it, which identified the key members. So these are the partners identified, along with the client, of course, themselves. And I think we've touched on some of these things already, in that the Alliance board, or the partners, including the client, make all the decisions based on you know a complete consensus of the board. And as you sort of mentioned earlier, Rob, you know, if you're struggling to get the consensus, maybe the question needs to be adjusted slightly. So I guess in that respect, you know, the Alliance board, in terms of making decisions, you know, this is going to involve negotiation to some extent, isn't it, between parties, in terms of what do we do type thing.
Yeah, and I think constantly you've got to be a good listener here. I think as on the board, listen to what the client wants, or the client in turn needs to listen to one of the partners. If the partner's saying, no, you should not do that because, or no, we cannot do that because, then you've got to listen, haven't you? But it's not good enough just to say no, or you've got to try and what do I use? It's like mediation. This is to me, this is like there's an iceberg, isn't there? And I always use this analogy. So we see what's above the iceberg, which is big lump of ice, but we don't see is the big thing below. And I think this is about the big thing below, the bit you can't see. And the big bit below, I always think is I would call that needs and interests. What are the needs and interests of the members of the Alliance board? And you've got to be asking those questions. You know, forget positions. You know, don't take positions. You know, be honest, be highly ethical, and explain the needs and interests, and work around. You know, if a client's saying, I want or need this, or what's that affect, explain your needs and interests as to why that's going to be a problem, and then come up with an alternative or a solution. You know, you've got to adjust things to get that consensus.
And I think it's fair to say that this is where the sort of the behaviours and attitudes of the partners, or at least the people who are representing the partners on the board, as part of the evaluation process of bringing those partners into the Alliance, is really important that those people can work in that collaborative manner. Because if they don't appreciate your iceberg analogy, then
they've had it. You sit there with their arms folded.
The board's never going to make a decision and become entrenched, won't it?
We've had it. You can imagine the first meeting, they say no and walk out in different directions. Absolute chaos.
Yeah, totally.
So it's not about necessarily a meeting of minds on that specific topic, is it? It's about being creative enough. You understand, you listen, and you try and work around it somehow. Okay, that's going to be very difficult to do but what we could do is this. How does that fit your requirements? And that's anybody to anybody, isn't it? So we're not, I don't see that we are, if you like, it's not master and servant by any stretch, and we're not the servant of the client here. We are working together to achieve not only the client's objectives, but surely all of those of in fact, everybody in the project, to be honest. But in particular, those on the Alliance board. We need to spend some time understanding the objectives of everybody involved in the project.
So other sort of key functions of the board, other than obviously the very important one of making decisions, is appointing the Alliance manager. And of course, that's a decision that the board make, and the board give direction to the alliance manager in what they do. And I think, as we touched on before, in terms of who the alliance manager is, it could be someone who is an employee of one of the partners or the client even, or of course it could be someone who is independent of any of those. But I think it's fair to say that, much like any other NEC contract, the alliance manager, like with the service manager or the project manager, they really need to understand this contract and how this contract is intended to work in order to do the role. And that's probably one of the most important requirements of that person or organisation who's doing the alliance manager role.
Yeah, I mean, not only have they got to go away and deliver what it is that the board wants, but I mean, you could potentially use that as that person as the facilitator, mediator, conciliator type role as well. So you need a quite incredible person to act, I think, as the alliance manager. Tim, how about you? You can do
that. And I think, as we'll see in a minute, of course, the tasks of the alliance manager are actually slightly different to say the project manager or service manager.
Okay, let's have a look at that this next one.
Yeah, we'll come on to that. Let me just sorry, I was just thinking the other thing that's worth just maybe touching on this slide is dispute resolution. In that, of course, it's the board in this case, so we don't have any of the W clauses, do we, in this contract?
No.
So we don't have sort of adjudication or a dispute avoidance board, but of course, in many respects, the alliance board is not the same as, but kind of the equivalent of a dispute avoidance board, in that they, through decision making, they resolve any disputes between the parties, don't they, or the partners, should I say?
We'll come on to it later. I think they can go to expert determination or something like that. Or is that the DBO? Or there's something like that.
I don't think there's a slide on that actually, Rob. But yes, there is a facility to go to
somewhere else.
In the contract.
Or else off to court or arbitration. I can't remember which one or something like that. But anyway, we'll lead on to that.
I think my understanding, Rob, is that the contract. So the board makes the decision. Maybe just go back to this slide for a second. The board makes a decision around resolving the disputes. They have the ability to bring in an independent advisor or an expert, in terms of assisting in making that decision. And my understanding is, obviously, if that doesn't work or people are still, in disagreement, then I guess ultimately they can go to something like litigation or arbitration, presumably, depending on the jurisdiction you're working in.
Yep.
Alliance manager.
Okay, so the alliance manager, the COO, if you like, managing the contract. So this person is reporting to the board. They are managing the early warning process. Again, the alliance manager. Okay, then we're thinking about one person here, but I always think of there's a group or a team. So it might actually be a few people who will ultimately help the alliance manager do the job that they've got. Depends on the project, depends on so many things. Because look at all this, they've got to manage the early warning process. They've got to attend every meeting. They've got to report on alliance cost and performance, submit payment applications, accept all the subcontractors that the partners put forward. Prepare a quality plan, make sure the quality plan is followed, create the program, issue the program, and if it leads to it, issue the termination certificate. Is that really one person who can do all of that? So to me, as a manager, the clues in the word manager, you have to make sure all these things happen. Whether you do them all yourself is questionable, and maybe the role starts off as one person, but as the job gets if you like, bigger and bigger and more, more effort, then maybe they need support and help and assistance. But you've got to do all these things. So you've got to.
I think if we think about this, maybe in the context of an ECC contract, some of these tasks traditionally are done by the project manager in an ECC, but some of these tasks are also traditionally done by the contractor, like preparing the quality plan or preparing the program.
Well,
So
submit payments
we've now got a bit of a
applications,
mix
cost
here, haven't
performance
we?
to mix. Yeah, it's an amalgam, isn't it? So you are representing, if you like, both the in the traditional sense, the client and the contractor. You're somewhere between the two, aren't you?
Yes, definitely, definitely.
So you're going to be a busy bee, and you want decent remuneration, I think. Okay,
And
so
as you say,
there's a lot to do. There's a lot to do.
yes, and as you say, there's maybe a number of skill sets required that may mean that, support is required. Maybe
Yeah,
a team of people. Undoubtedly, it probably is going to be a team of people.
yeah.
For the sort of nature of the work that's likely to be done.
I'm not sure I know anybody who can do all of those things themselves.
I
All those
know. I
projects.
think you're right.
Who's got all those qualities? Maybe somebody can put the hand up here and say, "I've got all those qualities," but I haven't seen anybody's hands go up. Quite a task, isn't it?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right. That's right. So behaviour aspects. I think we've sort of talked around some of this already to some extent.
Yep.
Obviously this is a really important aspect of the contract, or this particular contract. And of course we've said that for the alliance to be effective, and particularly the alliance board to be effective, they need to work together in order to make unanimous decisions. And if there's barriers to that, you've got to really try to work that out in terms of making sure you bring the right people on board into the alliance, who understand how to work collaboratively, and that's a tricky thing to do, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. No, I quite agree. So, I mean, clients might need some behavioural consultant assistance.
Yeah.
They might have a really good HR department that's well versed with this sort of thing anyway. So, use what you can, consult out what you need to. But what I think what me and Tim are saying, this is a really, really important aspect of assembling the board and the partners and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a 5-minute exercise, is it?
No,
It's
no.
unlike maybe other more traditional contracts, or traditional NEC contracts, where your tender and procurement exercise may be, relatively speaking, more straightforward, more quickly done from a time point of view.
Yeah.
Creating an alliance board or creating an alliance is going to take time and effort to get it right. So I think it's fair to say that in that respect, obviously, this type of contract, you're not using it for complex, large programs of work, because the time and effort in terms of creating the board or creating the alliance,
Yeah.
is only going to be warranted where you've got a long, big program of work. I think that's fair to say, isn't it?
A big program, I don't know, highly complex, sophisticated, all those sort of words spring to mind, but
Yeah.
not
When I
run
say
of the
big
mill,
program,
not run of the mill stuff.
yeah, when I say big program, maybe something that's going to run for a number of years.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be massive value in construction, but I think it's something that's complex, but also something that's going to take a number of years to deliver, or be delivered over a number of years, and hence it's worth taking the time and effort to bring together the alliance in an appropriate way.
Yeah, so the sort of thing I would do certainly at tender stage is turn some of those back into questions, and I would,
Sure.
or scenarios, and say, so let's test whether or not you can work collectively to support the delivery of the contract. So imagine this happened in this scenario. What would you do next? So you're asking,
Yeah.
organisations to see how they would respond to these, to see if it actually meets the ethos of the contract. Yeah, not straightforward.
So
Okay.
the client, I think we've already touched on this as well to some extent. They have fairly limited powers.
Yeah.
Obviously,
Yeah.
one of their key powers is to unilaterally be able to change the client requirements. But of course, that's only part of the scope. They can't unilaterally change the rest of the scope. That's a
Yeah.
function of the alliance board.
Yeah.
And of course, the other thing that they hold in terms of power is to stop the work or not start work,
Yeah.
if that is appropriate.
Which is highly unlikely, but once you've
Yes.
built this big machine and it's up and running, you're
Yes.
unlikely to press that stop, that pause button. But again, it's your money, isn't it? Ultimately, it's your money. You may not have the money in place. I don't know. There could be some other reason. You may have a wave two. Rethink the business case because of it. You might be building yourself another runway or two or something like that, say, on an airport, for example, and then suddenly saying, "Oh, blimey, are aeroplanes ever going to fly again?" or any other such thing. So.
Yes, yeah, let's hope so. Alliance members, of course, they are working together, to ultimately achieve the alliance objectives and their own partner objectives. So, of course, the alliance objectives, generally speaking, we talked about this, set by the client, perhaps with some input from the alliance members. But the partner objectives, presumably, they come when they join the alliance. They come with their own set of objectives, and that's the intention there, Rob.
Yeah, that's right. It's two to tango, isn't it? Why would you not spend some time trying to help each other achieve their objectives? I think you should do this in any job. It's crazy, isn't it? We always should talk to contractors. Say, why on earth are you here? What's the point? And if they're about cash flow, profit, I don't know what, safety, nice letter at the end saying how brilliant they are, then why can't the clients work towards helping their contractor achieve those objectives? It's not one-way traffic, is it?
No, that's right. And I guess one thing that should be thought about in that respect is, I'm thinking back to the sort of the procurement exercise of getting the alliance or creating the alliance. If the client has set the alliance objectives, and generally speaking, I guess that's going to be the case, and the partner is setting their own objectives, before it's all sort of stuck down on a bit of paper and people sign on the dotted line, we need to do a deconflicting exercise, don't we? Making sure these
reality
objectives
test,
don't
none of this
cause problems. So that's just another thing I think that needs to be borne in mind as part of the procurement exercise.
Yeah, well, I love this stuff personally. I mean, I don't know why people don't actually say to clients, why should we look up all the time to clients? Let's look across equal and say, look, these are my objectives. This is my organization. Time is limited. We're only going to work for 40 years or whatever it is. So, here are my objectives. Please help me achieve them. And funnily enough, I will help you achieve yours. That's just a very adult and modern way of thinking about things, isn't it?
Yeah. And of course, there's obviously obligations on the alliance members to, should we say, deliver the works, get on with it, work as an integrated team and get the thing delivered.
And the key bit is the last 4 words there: best for project basis, best for project. In fact, that's 3 words, isn't it? Best for project. So all your decisions are best for project.
And trying to keep that, I think, in the back of your mind the whole time is obviously important in terms of making this work for the best way for everybody, really.
I think you might need those words on the wall, in the alliance board meetings. Every so often, oh yes, remember, no harm in doing that. There's no harm at all.
Definitely.
Okay, so I suppose we need to accelerate a little bit. So the implementation plan. So what is the management structure of the alliance? What are their roles, responsibilities? Who is delegated what? Things like, I suppose, how we're going to communicate, all those things. And once it's in place, which is referenced in the contract data, then the alliance must comply with that. It can be changed, but again, only by agreement to the alliance board. So you've got to step up and deliver the promises that were made with the implementation plan, I suppose, at tender stage.
So is it fair to say that the client really is the person who's putting together this plan, or certainly the initial plan? It's referred to in contract data part 1, so that implies the sort of client, at the very least, makes an initial stab at this. But I guess, again, depending on how you procure things, and create the alliance.
If you do stage 1, stage 2,
maybe sort of a need for sort of modifications to it to maybe better reflect the reality rather than what was thought could be
Yeah.
achieved, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a good point. That's a good point. And the programs we mentioned, again, the program here, I would suggest is even more onerous than an ECC, because you are now tying together, a number of organisations, and you're
Yes.
representing all of them on one program.
So that's going to be quite a
quite a
complex,
task.
large document, or series of documents even.
This is a big old piece of work to do. You're probably in Primavera territory. You need a good Primavera driver for you. I suggest to put these things together. To me, it is like program management, isn't it?
Yes.
We do sort of project management, program management. The higher thing, it is that higher level of management
Definitely.
of all the different things that are going on. Land purchase and heaven knows what.
And that's,
So,
of
yeah.
course, this alliance manager needs to be able to have all that skill set, or have somebody who does
Yeah.
have that skill set to do
Yeah,
this.
they're going to make it happen. They haven't necessarily got to do it. Again, you're a manager, not necessarily a doer. But to be able to hold the program the right way is helpful. If you haven't got those skills, then you've got problems. Okay.
So costs. So I mean, this contract from a cost point of view still relies upon the concept of defined cost plus fee, and essentially the scope of defined cost plus fee is very similar to any other NEC contract. ECC contract, option C, or one of the cost-based ECC contracts. Very similar. Relies upon a full schedule of cost components. And of course, from a payment point of view, so the PWDD, or price for work done to date, is based on a forecast of what would have been paid by the partners by the next assessment date. So again, in that respect, this is sort of fairly traditional NEC type approach in terms of cost reimbursement. But again, I mean, because of the nature of the alliance, the disallowed costs are a little bit different, aren't they?
That's the one I'm drawn to. Yeah.
Yeah, it's far smaller scope in terms of disallowed costs than more traditional contracts, or more traditional NEC contracts.
You don't need an army of QSs for this one. Literally, it's almost an accountancy practice. This, isn't it? If you don't have accounts and records to justify, then it's a disallowed cost. Therefore, everything else is not disallowed. So if you remember things from ECC like correcting defects after completion, that's disallowed. Not complying with the constraint on how the contractor provides the work is not disallowed. Excessive resource not doing. Wow, you're all in it. You are absolutely up to here this time. Yep. You've got nowhere to turn. Go back to the take care in the first place, but very, very limited grounds.
But just thinking about that, of course, Rob, the last couple of bullets are quite important, aren't they? In that there is, for all those clients out there who are now a bit worried that there's no control, there is, of course, ultimately some control, because we have this brought in this concept of this alliance cost and a budget. And as it says there, the alliance cost is, of course, not just the PWDD, but it's also any other costs that the client incurs. And I think it's fair to say those costs need to be predefined.
Yeah.
And there is a mechanism in the contract, a little bit like the pain gain share mechanism, in where the budget is compared with the alliance cost.
Yeah.
And if the alliance cost is below the budget, we're in a saving situation. Whereas if the alliance cost is above the budget, we're in an overspend situation. Yeah. And then the consequences of saving or overspend are dealt with in the performance table. So it could be, not necessarily, but it could be in the performance table that you have a simple pain gain share, much like, say, a target contract. So saving is then shared in some way with between the partners and the client, or the pain is shared in some way. But of course, the performance table is very flexible, isn't it? You don't necessarily have to do the more traditional pain gain share, do you?
You don't, but I mean, these things were introduced before in ECC through X22 early contractor involvement. This concept of having alliance costs, even though it's not called that, but
alliance costs,
project costs or whatever it's called, and budget and incentives as you wish to. Okay, there's no performance table in there, but that concept of caring not just about your own costs, but everybody's costs collectively, and appreciating and respecting the client's budget, and the client's budget will change on limited occasions. So we've got to do what we've got to do, what we promised we would do within the budget, which is generally not going to change very much. So how are we going to do that then? And like you said, the performance table is there to, if you so wish to divvy up the pain and or gain that arises.
So depending on, so I think ultimately in terms of protecting the client, if I'm not saying that's the right attitude here, but for clients who are a little bit worried about the finances, that depending on how you draft the performance table, using this mechanism, you can create some protections, even if there aren't that much in the way of disallowed costs, for example.
So, and I've just so far, the focus is the performance table, the skills of the alliance manager, and picking your partners or the alliance board very carefully indeed. Yeah. That's what comes out of this, isn't it?
Yes,
okay, perhaps next one. We've got 10 or so minutes. So payment. So it falls to the alliance manager to do that payment certificate. They consult with the partners. They read the contract, as Tim just said. They read the definition of the price for work done to date. In my opinion, they too should carry out some sort of verification of the costs that the partners, defined costs that partners say they have incurred or will incur. They should do some auditing. You don't just believe everything everybody says and just pick it up and ask for that from the client. So there's a series of assurance verification stages here. So they pick all that up. They make sure they're happy.
The manager is independent. That provides maybe another level of assurance as well.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, you got to be careful here. You're asking for somebody to pay you money, or sorry, you're asking somebody to pay others money. There's got to be some due care that's approached to that. And if you just say, I just believed everything that everybody said and just added it all together and asked for that, then you got problems, I think. So you have to be diligent in assembling that application for payment. So the client should check it arithmetically, and perhaps a little bit of auditing makes the payment. Made directly by the client or via a project bank account. Why wouldn't you use a project bank account this day and age? But anyway,
and particularly with the alliance contract, perhaps
it just fits perfectly, doesn't it? But one thing we shouldn't be doing is slowing up the payment transactions. I don't think in an alliance.
No, and that's where, of course, the project bank account,
comes into
that, can't it? And to facilitate a more timely payment.
Yeah, I mean, there are other things like advance payments and things like that, but anyway.
Yes. Performance measurement. So, of course, we're
done this really, haven't we? But
I think this is we've kind of covered this to some extent. Obviously, this is related to the performance table, and of course, the performance table. It's in some respects it's a set of KPIs against which you are measuring performance. Whether it be the difference between the budget and the alliance cost, or any other kind of performance that you've defined in the table. And like any other type of KPI measurement performance thing, you've got to make sure the measurement is easily measurable.
Objective.
Yeah.
And also, you don't just wait until the end to say, oh dear. So there's regular reports, and there's rescue plans and all sorts of things. So we're doing the best that we possibly can to hit the targets stated in the table.
And as we've said, the consequence of hitting or not hitting a target, there can be, should we say, bonuses, incentives, and there can be penalties as well. So it can work both ways, and it's a very flexible document in terms of trying to incentivize ultimately everybody to work together in an appropriate way.
Yeah, I mean, the annoying thing to me is, why on earth doesn't the industry do this anyway? But anyway, that's another story for another day. And maybe philosophers one day can look back and say, it was truly the most stupid industry imaginable, full of reasonably intelligent people, most of which you've got degrees and or are chartered, who turn into buffoons once they get into contracts. But anyway.
But we need to, conscious of time, Rob. So
sorry.
Back to the here and now.
Okay. So, as we mentioned, there are very few instances where compensation might occur. Only client reserve matters. So they are those two, aren't they? I think, which is changing the client's requirements and stopping starting works.
Yes,
also,
there's sort of basically 7 default ones. You know, and it's largely to do with, as you say, either changing the client requirements, or the alliance board changing the scope. Changing the scope is, of course, but yes, stopping, not starting, a client liability, not allowing access, and a prevention event or change of assumption. So all of them are fairly. The ones that are there are fairly common ones to other NEC contracts, but there's just far shorter list.
Short length, and that's reasonable, isn't it? I would say in an alliance. Therefore, the alliance members will have to price for perhaps the additional risk that somebody's picking up that they wouldn't normally do in an ECC type of contract. And it says that other risks are shared by the alliance, but effectively we're sharing in the I don't know, financially, really, aren't we? We have this.
You're sharing it, aren't you? But of course, you're also trying to incentivize everybody to avoid those risks occurring. You know, in terms of people not doing things in the time that they're meant to do them, for example. You know, sort of interface issues, perhaps.
I mean, even more important, I suppose, with an alliance, everybody wants an outstanding job, met time, cost, quality, safety. You know, targets. You know, done some good, solid, hard work, enjoyed it, come out the other end unscathed, and want to go again. You know, and that's what you're looking for, isn't it? So just go back one if you would.
Oh, sorry, apologies.
Just very quickly. So it is for the alliance manager to decide that something is a compensation event. Very interesting. So the client steps back on this one. They produce a quotation. They also do the quotation. Yeah. This doesn't go to the client or the alliance board. It is what it is, unless a member of the alliance challenges it. And if somebody challenges it, then the alliance board will resolve. And I would like to think they challenge it both ways. Well, there's far too much money in that quotation. However, it's more likely that not enough money in that quotation.
Yes, you'd like to think it works both ways.
So again, you are alliance manager. You are both project manager under ECC and contractor under ECC. You are fulfilling both roles. I have actually seen that on ECC contracts before, but that's another story for another day. We haven't got time. Move on.
So liabilities and insurances. Well, I think again we've sort of reflected upon this in terms of compensation events that there are, you know, the liabilities, much like compensation events, you know. The lack of compensation events mean that liabilities are far more shared in terms of the alliance, you know, and I think what this slide is indicating, if I'm right, is that the client on the one side does retain ultimately some liabilities, and the partners on the other side do retain certain liabilities.
Everything else is shared.
Rest are in the middle there. You know, so I think we've got a few examples here on this slide of liabilities that are retained by one or other sort of side. You know, things like an omission act or omission, intentional act or omission, on the consequences of that, or breach of intellectual property rights, things like that. So there's only very few that are retained by either side.
Yeah, you can see the breach of intellectual property right might be reasonably straightforward to prove, but how do you prove intentional act, you know, or
tricky,
omission? Tricky. But anyway, move on. We're not lawyers. Let's not pretend to be one. So dispute resolution, as we said, so there's no blame or claims between the members of the alliance. So we're not, you know, we can't take action against each other except for a breach of clients or partners liability. Go back to that. Effectively that previous slide. So except for a breach of the clients or partners liability, we cannot make a claim against the other.
No.
The dispute resolution by the Alliance Board. So ideally, they sort things out themselves, but they have the right, as we said earlier, to appoint an independent expert to provide a non-binding opinion, and maybe they put it before the board, and if the board's happy with it, then it will become binding. It's a mediator. Okay, so to use mediator, I didn't realise that, but senior representatives negotiate and may appoint a mediator to assist them. I've missed
so
that bit.
I think that's another step in the process, isn't it? If the board can't
sort it out, passes to senior reps. Yeah,
you've got those two alternatives there in terms of, and I think they're alternatives in that you can either bring in an independent expert, or bring in the senior representatives and a mediator if necessary.
I haven't got the Alliance contract to hand, but where do you go after that? Is it do you bob off to court or arbitration, or whichever one of those you choose?
Unlike I was just looking at it as sort of as we were talking.
I suspected that.
And unlike more traditional NEC contracts, there is no tribunal in this contract. So this is why I sort of said earlier in the session. It seems to me that if once you've gone through one of these three options, if you like, I'm not saying the three options, but you've got these. Either the board make a decision, or you bring in an independent expert, or the senior representatives do it, or maybe a combination of all of that. It seems to me that if you still can't resolve it, then I guess, depending on jurisdiction, people can still go to, say, arbitration or litigation if there remains a dispute, notwithstanding the fact that termination may occur, as it says at the bottom there.
I'm not sure about going after litigation or arbitration, but they're saying, look, the show goes on. We've got to bottom this out. So if we can't sort this out, we're either going to bring the alliance to an end, which is highly unlikely step unless you're on day one of a 4-year project or something like that, or let's get rid of that one particular partner, because that one particular partner could be the thorn in the side. They could just stick out, and everybody else is on the same page. There's one partner who's away with the fairies, so that could happen as well.
But I guess what I'm suggesting is if you remove that partner still has rights under law in terms of coming back after to the alliance through litigation or arbitration if they feel they've lost out. I guess
I cannot comment. Cannot give legal advice. Next slide, please. So here is termination. There are rules, aren't there? So it's normal termination rules, I would say. Okay, in a slightly different context because it's an alliance. Let's not talk about termination. So you could get rid of one partner, all the partners, obligations of all the members if the work can't continue. But you need to get agreement of the Alliance Board. But it's such a negative slide. We need to move on. There's going to be no termination, is there? The point being that you have to have that just in case, don't you? Just in case. Of course. It's a backstop, isn't it? It's a backstop. How is the backstop going? Okay, last slide. Do you want to do that? Sorry.
No. I think when we're talking about similarities and differences, I think we're talking about
general, maybe ECC stuff.
That's right. So of course the Alliance contract, like other contracts, have a program, have compensation events, communication, early warnings, and of course a payment process. But there are a couple of slight differences, aren't there, in terms of there's no acceptance of a program. The Alliance
it is what it is.
And it is what it is, and hopefully it achieves what the Alliance Board wants it to achieve. Compensation events, two probably key differences here. There's far less of them because more risks are shared, and the Alliance manager notifies them when they do occur. And also works out the effect of them from a time cost point of view, i.e. produces a quotation.
It's interesting, isn't it? So here's your program, here's your compensation event assessment, and you just say
so,
thank you. You know.
Exactly. So it's really the alliance manager is doing all this together, isn't he? He's sort of he's producing the program and integrating compensation events into it and working out their consequences and producing the quotation. And of course, importantly, I think, like the program, there's no acceptance of the quotation, is there? As you've said before, the alliance board, you know, accepted or not accepted, sorry, don't have a problem with it, or if they do have an issue, then they address that. Communications, I think, is no different really in principle to any other NEC contract. We've got to have a clear, robust communication mechanism to deal with all the contractual communications like any other contract. Dispute resolution, of course, is a little bit different here, as we've just talked about from other contracts. But again, it reflects the sort of collaborative nature of the contract in terms of the alliance board seeking to resolve the issues. Not quite sure why dispute resolution sits against early warnings on this slide, to be honest.
Well, no, I think it's just differences. But anyway, I agree. I'm not sure. I don't think it's a comparison thing, but the others work, don't they?
Yeah, so that's a bit odd. But anyway, the alliance manager, obviously, from a payment point of view, I mean, he does the application, does the certificate, you know, so he does the function of a PM and a contractor together. And then, of course, the client still has got the same function as before in terms of making payments.
Or she, of course. The dispute resolution bit is, to me, you've made your bed, you better lie in it. You know?
Yes.
Be very careful assembling your partners. Okay,
I think that's right. And of course, to bring it right back to the beginning, in a way, Rob, you know, this is why setting up the alliance and making sure the alliance sort of understand how to work together in a collaborative manner is so important. You know, and of course, if that is really done effectively, then you know, hopefully disputes are going to be avoided, or if they do occur, the alliance board can sort them out.
Okay, slightly run over time, haven't we? Okay, so I think that's it.
I think it is. That is it.
Very good. So I've got no questions. If anybody wants to verbalise a question, if you just raise your hand, or any want to type. That's not a question. Somebody left the conversation. I like the left join. Join gone, back again.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've sort of posed questions to each other as we've gone through in terms of sort of issues. But of course, if anybody else has any questions that they would like to raise, please do so.
What we're definitely not trying to do is to scare people off this. I think it's fantastic. To me, it's the ultimate form of collaboration, but it's not for the faint-hearted and takes significant effort to both set up and manage it. So I would love many projects in the world to one day use the alliance contract. A question in many locations, if we're really ready to embrace all that comes with, I think this is very close to a pure alliance contract, you know, that sort of model. So how close are we?
Just on that point, Rob, of course, one thing you can do through this contract, correct me if wrong, it's not necessarily just for a one-off project, you know, albeit it might be a big project. You know, in setting up the alliance, you can run multiple projects, can't you, through the alliance?
Why not? Yeah. I mean, you can use this for things like manufacturing. You could use it for research. You could use it for manufacturing, all sorts of things. You know,
sure.
We always think about it's a project with a fence around it. You know, we build something, but not necessarily.
Yeah. No, exactly. So,
okay, I don't think we've got any questions.
But
we have slightly overrun. So
covered everything. Well done, Rob.
Well done, Tim. It was nice to contribute this time as well.
Yes, no, thank you for partaking, Rob, this time. It was challenging last time to talk to myself.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. So as we said, this has been recorded, be on the website. So if your colleagues in your organisations wish to catch up, on either or both of these. With APUG, if anybody's got any, needs, interest, thoughts, concerns going forward, any topics, workshops, that sort of thing, then do please let Letty, myself, or Vincent know. We'd love to hear from you. So that just leaves me to say thank you very much for Tim. Fantastic effort over 2 webinars, and hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much, Rob.
Thank you, guys. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye.
Cheers. Bye. Bye.